And would you look at that? The holes have now disappeared, just like all my money. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here at the stable, where today we're going to be focusing on quite a bit of metal work. No, Ozzy, not that kind of metal. Instead, we're talking about this hunk of junk we call scrap stang that has received a lot, and I'm talking about a lot of metal work in the last couple of months, which includes an entire front clip replacement, an entirely new cross member and motor mounts, and with all of that came some very pretty welds, as well as some not so pretty welds. We also have some sharp, jagged edges that we definitely need to address, and some leftover spots on the firewall patch. Like I've said many times before, the cosmetics or the beauty of this car is not my first, second, or even 10th priority, other than the engine bay. We've done months and months of work just to get that guy moved a couple inches back and a couple inches down. So damn right, we're gonna make this a very pretty area for that relocated engine to sit. We also spent a lot of time building these steering components, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove them before we start grinding and welding. If you missed the video where we built this steering setup, I'd recommend you checking it out. We had to add this shaft bearing when we built the steering components, and I didn't finish welding this tab that we made, so we'll go ahead and do that also. For today's job, we will be using my favorite welder ever, the MiG 135 from Eastwood, and no, this isn't a product placement or an ad. As a matter of fact, you can't even buy this anymore. And I'm gonna show you how good this welder is, just to rub it in your face that you can't buy it. See, and because of the way the world works, odds are I'm now gonna butcher this weld. Okay, not too bad. I kind of missed. Okay, not a huge fan, but I mean, it'll do. All right, this is a little bit off topic, but I got very much carried away setting it up. Let me just show you guys. Hey Jarvis, set the vibe. Isn't that sick? Might have gone a little bit overboard, but I know 13-year-old me would be freaking out if he saw this. All right, let's hit up the ugliest weld that we got. I mean, it's not really that ugly, right? But somebody in the comments described it as a series of tacks rather than a full weld. And I mean, that kind of sums it up perfectly. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit him with the grinder and try to flatten it out just a bit and see if we could lay down a better bead on there. This is gonna suck. All right, so we grinded it away, kind of butchered it a little bit. It looks a little crazy there, but should be plenty for us to get a good bead on there. Hopefully this one is a lot better, because I don't want to grind it and redo it anymore. I mean, it's not terrible, but I think I'm just offline. Like, I'm welding more on this piece than on this piece. Let me see if we could fix that. Well, I don't hate it, but I don't exactly love it. Wow, I'm just eating my words in this video because it's not really pretty still, but it is an improvement from the last one. At least we got a full bead across rather than it just being little tacks in the corner. But I'm not too upset about it. Yeah, it would have been nicer if we got some that look like these, but it's also tucked way down there where nobody will see it, and I don't think structurally it'll be a problem. And while we have the angle grinder out, we can focus on our next task, which is trimming all of this excess metal right here. It's pretty much all the way around, and this is what is left of the original shock tower. And the angle grinder should be able to cut it like butter. All right, so we got like 90% of the excess material off. There's just some spots that need a little bit of fine tuning and some spots where I went a little too crazy with the cutting wheel. So we're gonna need to tack that up with some welds and then grind it down. And I'm also grinding down these areas not only to get rid of those excess materials, but I also want to remove any jagged edges because I don't want to be in here and accidentally slice myself open. And for this little excess piece in the corner, we're just gonna grind it down and go with the flow until it looks kind of right. And again, there's really no right, it's just kind of what we make it. That's good enough for me. If we wanted to, we could grind it all the way down where that nick doesn't show anymore, but I'm just gonna fill it with weld. I forgot to turn the gas on. Okay, so you can see the weld got stacked a little bit too high because I forgot to turn the gas on, so I had to add more weld to the ugly gasless weld. But I also kind of like when things like that happen because then we can cover how to fix the issue. In cases like these, when I'm trying to knock down a weld or a tack or something when the surface is meant to be flat, rather than hitting it first with a grinding wheel or a flapper disc, I like to hit it with the high-speed cutter. That way we have a little bit more precision and fine-tunability when knocking down the peak. Okie doke, now you can see we've pretty much removed all of the peaks. So it's damn near flush here, but not just quite. It's still a little bit jagged and we still have a little bit of that weld showing, but now we can just give it a couple light taps. And just like that, we filled in that extra slice that we made, as well as knocked down that ugly weld that we made. And here's another one of those issues that is common when doing work on thin sheet metal like this, is it's a lot easier to have blow-throughs. This blow-through we made when we replaced this panel, but it's a lot easier to get blow-throughs when you're right next to a hole or at the end of the panel. Again, this hole is factory and I do want to keep it, so we're gonna have to be careful with how we go ahead and close up this blow through. And I'm gonna go from the back side, so if there's excess material, we grind it from the back, and that means less grinding in the front. Need more wire. Alright, so here's the finished product. And I know some of you are gonna say, oh my god, he ruined it. But we're not done yet, relax. Doing pretty much the same thing we did on the other tack. I've also noticed that this method doesn't heat up the sheet metal as easy as it would, say with an angle grinder, with a flapper disc or a grinding wheel, which is kind of what you want. You don't want a lot of heat in these panels, and I know we're welding, it sounds counterintuitive, but too much heat will warp it and start moving things around in the ways that you don't want to. Now we give it a couple light taps. All right, and that's the finished result right there. As you can see, not much signs anymore of a blow through. And yes, for you very picky people, there's this little divot right here where we didn't fill in enough. But just for you picky people, we're gonna go ahead and fill that in. We're just gonna give it a teeny tiny zap. All right, and as you can see, that tiny zap gave us this tiny booger. And just like that, we're back in business. As you can see, there's no divot no more, but now we have a pimple going into the circle. Alrighty, and just like that, we've recovered that circle shape a little more. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn close and a big difference from what we started with. Another area that needs a bit of attention is the firewall. Again, we made this patch to accommodate for the engine relocation, and that came with a whole lot of stitch welding. And when I say a lot of stitch welding, I mean a lot of stitch welding. All of these are series of 4 to 5 tacks at a time, which came with a couple long days and a new understanding for patience. Towards the bottom of the patch panel is where we had the most difficulty though, because we had to fill in a giant gap. So we shaped a metal rod in order to fit that gap that we were trying to fill. And I believe that with the difference in thickness from the rod to the sheet metal, that did create some difficulties. Or it could be that I didn't adjust the settings right. I believe that's why the bottom came out like a series of bird poop, but that shouldn't be too hard because now that it's kind of just set into place, we could just grind away at the metal and fill in the gaps. But on the topic of the firewall, we have a very important decision to make. We have to decide whether or not to grind down all of these stitch welds. And obviously that is a ton of work considering how much stitch welds there is all around this panel. I've discussed it with our team on Patreon, but we've come to the same conclusion. None. They provided some excellent points as to why we should keep the stitch welds, but they also provided some excellent points as to why we should grind down and flatten those stitch welds. And then Ryan Macy said we should leave half of it and then grind the other half. If we do flatten these welds, that means a couple hours of grinding and filling in some pinholes with the welder, grinding again, filling in pinholes and grinding again. And if we don't grind it and leave it as is, then I would be a liar, because for the last couple of months I've been saying this engine bay is gonna be as pretty as we can make it. I mean, the welds don't look terrible. They really don't, in my opinion. They're pretty well stacked and they're pretty uniform as well. Leaving it absolutely fits the theme of the scrap stang being ugly, rugged, kind of Frankenstein looking thing. I'm just so torn. I don't know. So we're gonna forgetty spaghetti about the firewall patch right now and move our attention to something else. Since we basically redesigned this entire engine bay in terms of wire routing, fuel line routing, and brake line routing, there's some holes that we don't need. Like this square hole right here, which was originally for the wiring harness that goes to the headlights, horns, turn signals, etc. But within the theme of keeping the engine bay clean and with the least amount of wires, we have now rerouted all our wires through this hole in the wheel well. It's basically just gonna follow the same route, just on the outside of the engine bay. So again, we no longer need this hole, so we will be covering it up. And how do we do that? Well, we first get a template of the rough size of the hole, just like that. Grab our favorite piece of scrap metal. Okay, that's really sweet. On the first try, we got the little patch to fit. All right, so you can see our little patch fit pretty damn good. It shouldn't be too hard to make this work. I'm just gonna clean up a little bit of these edges. Alrighty, let's see if we could get ourselves a good tack on here. And this is where you get really used to how your welder works and what settings you should use, because you kinda have to get it right on the first time, or else you might blow through that or just create a booger that's not very well welded onto it. So let's see what we can do here. Okay. Kind of glad that happened. So, like I said, if you don't have it well adjusted when you start making these initial welds, you might have some issues. I noticed the sound was a little bit weird when I did this one, but I continued, and look, we had a nice blow through on there. So we're gonna decrease our heat just a tiny bit, And I'm also gonna decrease the wire a little bit. That sound was a lot better. Okay, so our bottom weld came out pretty damn good, but the top one, we blew through it again, so I'm gonna change angles. I think the settings are good. It's just the angle that I might be at, so I'm gonna weld from the inside now. Alrighty, and here's the result. As you can see, it looks a lot like our patch panel over here, but we're not done yet. Relax. And just like that, we have now plugged this hole. It's not perfect, right? It's not like completely flush. It has some imperfections here and there, but nothing a little bit of a skim coat won't fix. I'm not sure if I'm gonna delete this circle hole just yet, but I do know that we are going to be deleting these holes right here as well as these. These were for the starter solenoid, which we have relocated under the dash, and these are for a battery insulator, which the battery we also relocated to the trunk. I am excited to do these because this is probably the most common shape of hole that will be deleted from an engine bay, say if somebody is shaving an engine bay or cleaning it up. And boy, ain't it lucky, I accidentally made the perfect plugs for these holes. When we replaced the front clip of this car, it required a whole lot of spot welds to be cut out, and that rendered a ton of these coin, dime, token looking things, which I kid you not are the perfect size for these holes. So that means that with a magnet holding them from the rear, we have a damn near perfect plug to weld on. And that we will do. Alrighty, so here's the cluster that we ended up with. As obviously you guys can see, they all end up kind of the same, and we just had to grind them down. On the first plug over here, we installed the plug like this, facing inwards as such, but this time we're going to flip it around and weld it on like this, see if that makes any difference. We're still going to weld the same perimeter, but I'm assuming that small lip at the edge is going to melt and melt along with this apron right here, so let's give it a shot. All right, so we got both holes plugged. As you can see, the one on the left did turn out a bit cleaner, but I guess we won't know the final results until it's all flattened out. And would you look at that? The holes have now disappeared, just like all my money. All jokes aside, the holes are now really gone. This one came out really nice. There's really no trace anymore of the holes here. But now let's throw in a curveball. These very tiny ones, you can't really get a plug to go in there, so we're gonna have to use another method. As you can see, they're freaking tiny. What we're gonna do in this case, rather than plugging it and then welding it, we're just gonna straight up fill it with weld. But Angel, there's gonna be blow-throughs. Not with this guy. This is a copper spatula Ozzy uses to flip his quesadillas. And what we're gonna do here is place this spatula right behind these holes. And since it's copper, it won't MIG weld onto here. So we will just be able to fill that hole. And also apologies if my voice sounds a little crazy today. I've been fighting a cold for like 3 days and I can't even stand hearing myself. Okay, nice. All right, so they look pretty damn good. If we look on the backside, they definitely penetrated all the way through. And with the magic of editing, let's go ahead and make these flat. And just like that, these holes are now gone too. Wow, if only the whole car could be done just like that. I'm gonna have some further discussions with the team to see what we should do regarding that firewall patch. I really just can't make my decision. Also, I wanna apologize for the lack of videos lately with the holidays, my other job, and me getting sick. It's been kind of wacky lately, but we got another video out. That just means we're one step closer to actually driving this thing. With that being said, thank you guys for hanging out. We'll see you on the next one.